Welcome to the Economist events, The Connected Workforce, Maximizing Productivity and Minimizing Risk. I'm Riva Richmond, Technology Editor at the Economist Intelligence Unit in New York. With me today are Sandy Pentland, Director of MIT's Human Dynamics Laboratory and MIT Media Lab Entrepreneurship Program. He's also most recently author of Social Physics. We have Nathan Bricklin, who's Senior Vice President and Head of Social Media and Collaboration Strategy at the Wholesale Bank at Wells Fargo. And Bill Hurley, who is CMO at Unify and formerly CTO at Westcon. A big thank you to Unify for hosting this event. Sure. So this is really an event for you. We'll be taking questions from the audience throughout this event. You can post them directly on the website or via Twitter with the hashtag #ConnectedWork. We'll try to take as many of your questions as we can throughout the discussion. So an explosion of new communications technologies is really changing the way we work. It's a hyper-connected workforce now. The way we're communicating, collaborating, the way we innovate is changing. So what are we learning about the value of this digital communication versus that face-to-face communication that we've always relied upon? Sandy, maybe you can start.
Yeah. Okay. I think there's a lot of confusion about the roles that these two different types of communication play. So a lot of the digital media are about facts and ideas, and we like to play with those. We like to spread them around like fads, but they have very little to do with habit change. So it's good if you needed to get the spreadsheet to talk to the person right now, brilliant. But in terms of finding ways to change behavior, getting an organization to work together, it doesn't seem to be nearly as influential as tailoring the face-to-face communication or using the face-to-face communication and sort of leveraging that using the digital media.
So what do you think, does the digital communication sort of help or hurt cohesion in the office and the social connections, the social glue that sort of make a company run?
Well, I think that the base level of trust and interaction and learning comes from the sort of face-to-face type things, rich channels of communication, and then the social media can leverage that at some, but it can't replace it. And when you try to replace it, you end up with odd things, like you end up with people that really aren't in the loop or don't share the culture and things that are not so good.
Yeah, I wonder, you want to understand the productivity impact, right? So everyone says these technologies are making you more productive. It's around how much more productive are the people, how do you measure those productivity increases, as opposed to what we were talking about before, which is that distraction mechanism where so many technologies are creating this multitasking world, and I'm doing this and then I'm switching from here to here.
But does it help with idea flow? I mean, does it connect people that way?
So Wells Fargo is a large company, right? We have 280,000 team members. And Wells Fargo culture is built on relationships. That's how we get work done. Relationship with other team members, relationship with customers, relationship with partners. And face-to-face is obviously the best way to make those strong ties stronger. But, we've got a dispersed workforce. Many times teams are distributed. Many times people that you need to speak with are people that are not on your teams. And so we use, and we think there's a value in using these digital social networks, for instance, as a way to create weak ties, and then we can follow up with some face-to-face to make those ties stronger. So we see it as a way to extend your existing network. And you just can't do it physically, right, if you don't have that opportunity. Now, it's not as good as face-to-face, but in the environment that we're in, it's a good way, it's kind of a gateway to, again, making those weak ties, and then you can follow those up with in-person meetings or other things, video conference, for instance, to build on those.
So if innovation requires sort of bringing in new ideas from different people and engaging a lot of people, so it's a help then to have the digital tools to bring in people who are maybe not in the same location.
Well, I think so. I mean, the way we look at it is, so we use email very heavily, right? So email and IM, that's the way we connect and communicate. And oftentimes email is using like an IM. That's the way they use email. We have a lot of conference calls, and that's kind of where we collaborate around getting tasks done. And then we use in-person meetings. That's where we really start to drive some of the innovation. Now, we can do all those things more effectively, right? So we're not doing as effectively as we could, but we use them in different ways, and innovation generally starts with the in-person, but then again, you can use, just like we're having in this meeting here, you've got people that are joining online, asking questions. We're starting to use some of those social tools to do that, to include more people, because the more people you include, that's the biggest problem we find, is that when you have a meeting, you invite people you think should be there. You don't think to invite the people that you don't know about, right? And so this gives you the opportunity to open up, and then people that you may not have thought about can then join and help with the innovation.
Yeah, I like to think of the digital tools as being really good at bringing ideas in for consideration. But what I find when I look at corporations and measure them is that it's the rich channels of communication and the discussion among people, not necessarily in a meeting. It's like, you know, Joe, what did you think about that? That sort of thing that winnows all those ideas down to things that people can really believe in, and urges them and gets them to adopt it, and really causes behavior change.
It's interesting. We had just done some studies, and we talked a little bit about this, where somewhere on the order of 79% of people are more willing to participate if they're virtual, if they're on the phone, and speak up and get more involved. And so that, from a productivity perspective, I think is significant. That those virtual or anywhere workers are actually participating, and to your point, whether it's a weak link or not, they're generating more value. From that
we did an
conversation.
interesting thing with telephone calls and things like that, where we had something called the meeting mediator, and what it did is it just gave everybody a little display of who was talking, how much they were talking. And what it did is it reminded you that you were supposed to contribute, and you weren't supposed to suck all the oxygen out.
And what about the
huge.
person who is doing email and not really engaging?
They're just wasting bandwidth at that point.
So it gets everybody engaged and the idea flow a lot better, and that generally results in much better productivity.
Yeah, one of the challenges I see, though, and speaking of studies, and I saw this on the plane, so don't quote me on it. I think it was a Nielsen study. It was about television, and it talked about, even though there could be hundreds of channels, most people will focus on like 17 or something. And so where I see our next big challenge is, as we get people to start using these digital tools, these social networks, is how do you get them to know about all of the areas they can participate in, right? You don't want to have this deluge of information and possibilities. They don't know where to start. So. That's one of the challenges. How do you take these social networks and continue to evolve a group to change, as opposed to create a group and now you should join this one and join this one and join this one? That's something I see as a big challenge for us.
And that gets to that productivity or the challenge, right? Which is the whole idea that the technologies create the perception of more time, right? For executives and for any worker to participate. And time is the one asset that companies really, it's a huge asset of an organization, but they're not really measuring it, right? And so your point on which social networks do I participate in is hugely important, because time turns into money, and if we're not managing it correctly, you're ending up wasting time, and that's wasting money. And so the proliferation of these social networks becomes more and more important for organizations to have a way to bring them together to make sense of what would be independent conversations and turn those into something that's more coherent.
And one of the things that we've done with many corporations is make a little display of different types of communication, email, face-to-face, so that you can see during the day, you know, what media are being used between which groups. And that's usually really interesting, because people would realize that they're missing out on something, or that this is one that's really not significant.
Do you think the modality I don't know the right word, prevents people from actually doing as much communication as they could? In other words, although technology's taken us so far, the fact that I've got to turn on the video, or I've got to turn on the microphone, or I've got to do the phone. And so to me, that seems to be the hurdle that we really got to.
Spontaneous stuff, right?
And that gets back to the one thing we haven't talked about when we talk about the innovation piece, and I know we talked about earlier, is the impromptu face-to-face opportunities that you have. And so technology can do some, but there's a lot of value. We do a lot of work around physical space. and how that can enhance, and I know you've done some work around, changing break times, but, how do you set up those those unplanned kind of where you trade information that's the most
'Cause
valuable?
That really is the most valuable.
So we're finding ways to sort of mimic the sort of the benefits that we get from the normal face-to-face communication. We're able to bring that to the digital world?
To the virtual world, I don't know.
Except that, like, we did a big study of a community where we looked at when people use different modalities at different times. And what we found is on days that people were really, really happy, something good was happening, or really, really upset because something bad was happening, they always used rich channels of communication. So face-to-face, video sometimes, things like that. And the rest of the time they were happy with social media.
Right. So is that something, I mean, taking from one of the questions from the audience about sort of applying this to a global enterprise and the sort of challenges of that, or is it really the global enterprise that has the resources to put these kind of systems into place?
Well, I mean, so Wells Fargo is global, and so we're really seeing the value of, you don't have any other options, right? So I don't have options to see somebody in Europe on a regular basis. So how do I include them? I mean, one of the things that again, we've talked about is the importance of including a diverse group of roles, if you will, right? So you've got managers, you've got people in operations, you've got salespeople, and that's where you're going to get a lot of the innovation. And so if you've got traveling resources, or they're just not near you, you can use, it's not the best thing, but you can use some social networks to do this. And simple things like having them fill out their profile and putting up a picture on there makes them more real. I mean, it's little things like that that start to build that relationship. And it's amazing how when you meet somebody and you can do that virtually, you're just more likely to think about them, you're more likely to go out of your way for them. That's just what happens.
What about the role of video? I mean, are you seeing that that's useful to recreating the in-person?
A lot of times, video's great, except that it's usually down at the end of the hall with a sign-up list.
Right.
So the most effective uses I've seen of it are people have, like people in their work group have a little sort of fingernail that's a live video feed, but like at 64 pixels by 64. And what you can do anytime you want is you just click on that, and instantly you have this, not great quality, but a video live chat with them. And then you put it back. So it's like turning around and saying, Sam, what do you think, right?
And I think, the fact that, we're talking about phones and having cameras and the video on the phone has allowed organizations, and humans as well as organizations, to accept a lower quality of video as comfort level. So instead of going down the hallway to the big video room because that's where the video is, I'm very happy for a quick chat with you on video today. At a lower quality, because I'm going to get the work done really quick. You're going to answer my question, and I can move on, right? And so, from my perspective, that is where the value of video comes in. Is where it becomes a natural part of your everyday work, as opposed to something that you have to actually, switch modes for and segment out and send an appointment to.
So there's other sorts of things.
And we have a question from the audience about video, actually, and whether it will become the new voice. Will video be everywhere?
Video is everywhere already. But it's different than voice. One of the things that's wrong with both voice and video is that we have to take turns, like we can't talk over each other, whereas in a real meeting, we'd be talking and I'd say, what did you say? And then we'd go, you can't do that on those other media. Video is worse than audio that way, although it's richer.
You can't read the people, read the
See,
room?
what I can't see is I can't see that you roll your eyes when he says something.
But the benefit with video done right is that it's a media that's recorded, and I can refer back to it. I can search it. I can revisit this conversation a year later. But I don't think video is ever going to replace just voice, because it's just too convenient right now for me to use a phone if I just need to make some sort of a quick conversation.
Also, there are sort of privacy concerns. It's like actually having a camera on you in your office all the time.
And it really does, right? and culturally it really does preclude, it makes you step back for a second and maybe hold back on what you're thinking of, as opposed to if you can find the right mode for the conversation, whether it's instant messaging or what have you, for the virtual worker, it's going to work. It's going to be more
So
convenient
one
for
thing
them.
I think that people miss in this debate is that it doesn't have to be either or.
Right.
Like we were talking about this notion of co-working spaces. So instead of working at home, you're working on something local to your town with other people from your company, very cheap sort of space, but it lets you sort of feel part of the culture. You meet people from other part of the company, and then you go into work in the central location 2-3 days
Right.
a week. So that's just a little more expensive than having people work at home, but it keeps them in the loop.
And it keeps the people, the virtual workers, they want to be virtual, but there are times where they want to be home. I mean,
Yeah.
they want to be in the office. They want that human interaction,
Sure.
right? So
Yeah.
it gets you a higher level of satisfaction for the employee, and it does create that cross-pollination of ideas between
Yeah.
sales and marketing and products
I think
and
you could do
services.
some of it internationally too. Although this goes against personnel policies. So it used to be that people would go through rotations in different countries
right.
because there was an expectation you'd be with the firm for 20 years.
Yeah.
So it was investment in your career and in the firm. And it's not so much anymore, right?
Right,
Right.
right.
Well, I mean, but speaking of sort of the cost, is this new sort of mobile work, is it exacting a cost on the company's sort of the cohesion, the social structures of that work environment, or is this just the reality and we'll find new ways of connecting?
You know, for us, it's actually helped, right? So we have a lot of folks, depending on the role, that are on the road that in the past would have to connect. You know, I have to go into my PC and I'd have to go VPN to connect. And so now, if somebody's looking for them, if they're important to a conversation, they can join much more quickly. So they're much more involved on a regular basis than in the past when they didn't have mobile. So for us, we're finding that it actually is a huge benefit to our organization because it keeps people connected.
Yeah, so the technologies like presence, right? So if my phone is on and it's available, it's integrated with my calendar, and now you would know that I'm available, as opposed to, gee, I don't know where Bill is or what have you. I think those technologies have been hugely productive. So much so, though, that we have to worry about, are we properly managing all of the technologies that are coming at us all at the
Right.
same time, and making sure that the prioritization is occurring correctly, right? So if I really need to talk to Sandy, but Nathan needs to get a hold of me, somehow there has to be that intelligence that allows me to say, Nathan needs to barge in on the conversation
And you
that's
might want to
occurring.
talk to your wife or husband and
Yeah.
kids occasionally.
Exactly, yeah, yeah.
And just be quiet and out of it for a while.
And so
you know.
if I may, that gets to the whole balance, right?
Yeah.
Which is, in the past, you would always hear people saying, I've got to find the right work-life balance. Well, it's really work-life integration, right?
Yeah.
And because you're not either or anymore. It's just social technologies now.
Right.
It's just, that's the way it is.
Yeah, we would actually be doing more in mobile if we didn't have some security concerns, right?
Yeah.
I think we'd be doing
Yeah,
more in
yeah.
mobile.
Yeah.
It's just another screen size to do your work, and it gives you
Yeah.
more flexibility on when and where you
So
do it.
are significant new risks being brought in into the picture from your perspective? I know obviously you're at a highly regulated
Yeah.
company.
So we are regulated, and I don't see regulation as a barrier to innovation or even to productivity. I see it as a way to make us, drive us to be more creative, right? But there's certainly security concerns. I'd say the biggest thing that's holding us back when we think about technology is the lack of integration, and really because of cloud, the security. And so. Nobody cares more. I mean, I've been at Wells for a long time. Nobody cares about more of data security than Wells Fargo. I would stake my career and reputation on that one. And but we don't use that as a way to say we're not going to do it. But we use that as a way to hire the best people that are smart enough to solve the problems. And so the real challenges out there when we think about security, and it's getting worse with the cloud. But there are ways to address that, and we're doing that. But it has been slowing up where we want to go and where our team members and customers want us to go, because we've got to make sure that we've done it right.
The security on one of the things that's, I think, held a lot of people back is the traditional thing was you would isolate a system from everybody else.
Yeah.
So you don't allow internet in,
Right.
you don't. But as it turns out, you always end up updating the system or putting in the little
Right.
USB thing, or you hire a new
Right.
guy or fire
Exactly.
an
Yeah,
old guy. So
exactly.
there's no such thing as isolated systems. And once you realize that, you come up with a very different strategy for security, one that's much more distributed, one where you realize you're going to take some hits,
Right.
but you make sure that nobody takes out the whole thing at, at
Right.
the same time.
Right, right.
This actually, I mean, not to get in deep water, but this is the problem with the NSA thing. And after the Snowden affair happened, the head of NSA said the biggest mistake we made was putting all the data in one place.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because that means one guy can go in and clean the whole thing out, right?
Yeah, we have a question from the audience about the bring your own device phenomenon, of course. I've talked to security experts about this quite a bit, and I'm sort of wondering how you're approaching it at Wells Fargo. The impression I'm getting is it's really forcing companies to focus on securing the data.
Yeah.
And acknowledge that no devices are 100% secure.
Well, that's right.
So
we
how
are,
are you approaching
we've,
it?
We've embraced it, and it is forcing us to think about security in different ways. Again, I think we're being creative in solving some of those challenges. I mean, one of the things that I do when it comes to security is we encourage experimentation around Wells, which is great. And so one of the places we get the most innovation is I go find the rogues that are trying to do something that they shouldn't be, using a cloud service they shouldn't be, and I connect them with the compliance folks so that they have the conversation, and so that we can actually build something, we can bring the right folks in to build something that solves their needs, right? If you look what people are trying to do to get their work done, which one of them is bring your own device, then, and it's not something that they can do compliance-wise or regulation-wise, then, but there's a reason they're doing it. Why are they doing it? What aren't we providing to them? And so we figure that out, right? We say, show us what. We use some ethnography, right? Do some ethnography with them, figure out why they're doing this, why is that part of their workflow, and then create a secure solution for them. And part of that is the BYOD.
And so are you managing the devices that your employees are bringing in to the building?
Yeah, we have
Well,
a
and
BYOD.
I'd ask, what does bring your own device mean anymore, right? And so we were talking before, and I wear this thing that measures how much steps I take,
Yep.
right? But this is talking to a network. And so I think it gets back to managing the information, because there's going to be another device tomorrow that's going to access that information somehow, and being able to ensure that the information is secure, and you don't end up tweeting the wrong data that you're not supposed to put out into the environment, really becomes the opportunity, I'll call it.
So one of the things that's transforming is when you get away from this put everything in Fort Knox mentality, then you realize you have to have this sort of chain of custody of things. Those are called trust networks in general. So nothing is ever transmitted except encrypted. The only messages you can transmit are ones that are understood by the system. And things like the SWIFT network, for instance, uses.
Yeah.
That's an interesting thing, because it's, what is it, $3 trillion a day.
Yep.
And as far as we know, it's never been hacked, even though it operates in 163 different countries with a lot of pretty squirrely people, right? And what they've done is they've sort of made it end-to-end secure, patterned what's happened, used contract law to reinforce things. And you can do that on the individual level too. It's not expensive to do that anymore. And what it does is it brings you a new sort of security that's a sort of complete but distributed security.
Well,
And I think we'll move towards that.
And one of the things that I didn't realize, actually, I think my boss sent a tweet about this, was, and I didn't appreciate from a security standpoint how important vendors and partners are. So simple things like your door swipe, or the vending machines that might use some, that are sending some data out. Those are the ones where you've really got to keep track of, right? Because those are the ones that nobody's thinking about, where hackers can come in.
That's my point on something
right,
like
no,
this.
absolutely. And I didn't appreciate that.
Yeah, it creates
These smart machines.
These, so it's almost quote unquote impossible to block the hardware, the access points. So you have to start thinking about how the information is being collected, and how it's being managed, and how it's being searched, and how is it central or is it distributed, and who has the keys to tying that data together. That becomes much more of your defense mechanism, if you will, as opposed to trying to block iPads today and tablets tomorrow.
Really having things where data is distributed to where it needs to be, where it's encrypted, and also where data always goes with permissions and provenance. That seems to be the best practice now. Because that way, when you get a piece of data, you know where it came from.
Right.
It has to say that. You can
Yep.
check it. It has to say what you can use for and what not.
And who can
it'll-
use it.
And who can use it.
use
And you can actually have really trusted hardware that you know can't be hacked, that looks at those things and enforces the rules about it.
And it would apply, or does apply, not just to, text, but to video and to voice and to other,
Yeah. Yeah.
types of media.
So, but what about the risks from sort of employee oversharing, or they have these powerful tools in their hands now? What kind of policies do companies need to have, to address that?
Well,
So I know
were just talking about this.
My opinion is that most of those policies are already developed for us, right? That we have those policies around what kind of information you can share. It's a blanket policy, and it doesn't say you can share this in email or you can share this on the phone. This is the kind of information. There's different classifications of data and information, and you can share some of it internally and some of it externally and some of it with nobody. And so that should apply across the channels.
No matter what way, whether you're speaking to someone in a room or
Exactly
using
right,
a
exactly
digital
right.
tool.
I agree 100%. I do think, though, there's an extra layer of concern, or concern maybe is the wrong word, but awareness that has to occur in organizations as to how easy it is with some of the social networks to let something out by accident.
Yeah.
And so having that education, having that awareness is becoming more and more important as these myriad of apps and technologies are appearing every day. And there is a bit of a generational aspect to it as well, which is that what maybe from my generation would be absolutely ridiculous to even think you would let near a social network, and to other generations it's like, well, if I share that information, I may actually get, they're more comfortable in that networking environment and collaboration on a broader scale. They may be more willing to share that information, thinking that it will actually create value for the firm in the long run by getting inputs from others. I think that's a challenge for organizations.
So one of the things about the sort of next level of networking, where data comes with permissions and comes with provenance, is then I can try and share it with you, but if you're really not supposed to see
Yeah,
it,
you
it
can't
won't
see
go.
it. Yeah,
right?
that's
And if you think it's a good idea to share it with somebody and it fits with the permissions, go for it.
go for it. Yeah.
Right?
Right.
And you don't have to say, oh, is it this media or that media,
Right.
or things like that. The only thing that you can't put in that framework is sort of free speech. So if I'm just typing from my memory, I can put in the magic number just because I read it an hour ago, and there's not much you can do about that except train people
But
that
that's
you
been
never put
yeah.
anything.
That's
It's
been the challenge for as
Yeah.
long as there's been corporations, though, right? Whether it's using Twitter or it was using a IBM typewriter or something. I think that's always been the case.
Yeah, so I'm also very curious what you think about how these tools are changing also the way that we're working, or the workflow. Are there, is teamwork different? Is innovation different? Are outcomes different because we have these tools now?
So let me start.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think there's a huge promise in that. For us, until they're really integrated, it's sometimes difficult to figure out which one to use, and then to get scale, get enough people on the different things. So we have lots of the technology is good, but it's not integrated. And if it's not integrated, I'm going to do what makes sense and what I need to do now, and I'm not going to have the long view of it necessarily. It's like, I need to do this now, I need to connect to this person now. I'm not going to think, there's probably a huge value to having these other people that I don't know who they are involved. Once it's integrated, it's easy. Say, I'm going to have this meeting, it's about this, and that goes out to the network, and anybody that's interested in that meeting could potentially join, let's say. And so, because we're not there yet, I said earlier when we were talking earlier, is that I don't think technology is moving too quick for us. I think it's moving too slow for us. There's lots of things that we want to do that, like the one you just mentioned around, I want to send this out to these folks, but I don't want it to go people that shouldn't see it. And when technology catches up to what we want to do, then I think it'll start to really change the way
Yeah, and we have a
innovation's done.
question from the audience sort of about the usability. They want an Apple-like experience, So, how do we, I guess we're not really there yet either in terms of ease of use.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. it takes a lot of design and experience to get that very clean, effortless sort of a thing.
Yeah.
And it means that you have to automate a lot of the hard stuff underneath. But automation is scary because sometimes it goes awry, right? And so we're in a place where, yeah, we think we want to automate that, but then are we going to cause more problems than we are solving? I think with work groups, though, one of the things we also need to do is understand the roles of different types of communication. Rich communication like face-to-face, tweets versus longer emails versus video, because I think they play a different role in the way we think about things, the way we decide to change our behavior, the way groups bond together. That's certainly things we see. And until that's like sorted out, you can't figure out what are the right tools, right?
Right, and I think so to me there's the modality challenge, which is what, whether I'm supposed to use video or I'm supposed to use email or I'm supposed to use the phone. But there's also, old habits are hard to break, where I probably should be using instant message to talk to you, but I'm going to use email, right? And there's an inefficiency there, but I'm more comfortable with email because that's just what I grew up with. And so you have this transition period where you're more comfortable in instant messaging, I'm more comfortable in email, and it can make things awkward. When we can eliminate those modalities and focus on what's happening, it's a conversation. And so having that conversation becomes the focus, and the technology becomes immaterial, and it just knows the modality to be used based on that conversation. That's when I think we'll have really kind of won the day in terms of the
And the thing that
technology.
I will add to is that, if you think about most people's job on a daily basis isn't to innovate, right? So some people are lucky enough that that's their job, but most of it is, how do I get my work done? How can I do it more effectively, efficiently? How can I connect better? How can I grow my network? How can I serve, in our case, how can we serve and the customer more quickly and more effectively? So, and where you get the value, I think, in some of these, where I think the value is going to come with these social networks is people outside of your organization, when they have the opportunity to participate and observe, that's where oftentimes you'll get some interesting support in this, have you thought about doing these kinds of things? So to the extent that we can build use the tools to show the masses or more people what it is we're working on, what are some of our challenges, right? What are our challenges? Better is you're going to be more innovative, say, look, this is a challenge in my team. If I just put it out to my team members, I'm going to do okay. If I put it out to a broader base, I'm going to get much more interesting suggestions around how we might innovate. And so that's where I think we're going to get the value.
Crowdsourcing with customers?
Well, certainly internally, internally. But customers as well. Customers play an important role.
No, but not so long ago, 6 nines was the mantra, particularly in banks. But what that means is there's no innovation unless it's everywhere. And so that's a recipe for no innovation, right? What you need to be able to do is every branch, every service needs to try things with a safety net that says you're not going to break the regulations, and the money will still be there at the end of the day. But you have to have this very sort of dynamic experimentation, and of course all the systems have to support that.
Exactly right. That's
still
the key.
maintain
That's the key.
auditing, still maintain the security.
We have a question from the audience about using social technologies in a public sector environment. And is it different there? What do you think versus the private sector?
Well, if I could jump, I think it goes back to very much what Nathan was saying, which is the same rules that you used before for other, let's call them more mature technologies, still apply, right? So common sense still applies. The whole idea of I don't want this information to get out still applies. I think there is a awareness incumbent upon the company to educate its employees on the fact that these new technologies are so, I'll call it fluid, but they can kind of slip through your fingers so fast. And all of the mechanisms that are in place maybe for email to protect an organization may not all be in place to protect the organization in Twitter. So I think that, but the basic policies would be the same in regardless of what the technology is.
And I think culture plays a big part of that. So I think it's less about private versus public versus what is your culture, right? So we are successful in collaboration at Wells Fargo because that's in our culture. Even way before social media, it was way before there was video conference, collaboration, building your network, building relationships was part of it. And so also the ability to, and the freedom to test, and it's okay to fail, right? So you've got to have that built in your culture. If you have that in your culture, and you're in the public space, and that's great. If you don't,
Yeah.
it's not going to work private or public.
It's really difficult in the public space because, first of all, that failure mode is not supposed to be
Right.
something that ever
Right.
happens.
Right.
Second of all, there's no competition. If it's the city of New York, it's not like there's another whole bureaucracy waiting to come in. So they don't actually have to be up to the top of their game because there's nobody showing them up. They'd like to be. I'm sure they're good-hearted, but it isn't really a competitive environment. And then it's politics. So what are politics? Politics is about getting down to particular people, showing them what you're doing, getting their vote.
Yeah.
And that's the objective function. It's not money or delivery of product. It's actually, are these guys going to vote for me the next time around? And that doesn't have a whole lot to do with efficiency. It has to do with, I'm really your friend.
As a customer of the city of New York, if you will, I do want that organization to interact with me in the modes that I'm now comfortable with, which could be social technologies, et cetera, right? So maybe as a customer, I'm trying to drag along maybe some of these public sector organizations, but as a consumer, I'm absolutely demanding that I want to be able to interact with you, just like I can interact with a consumer product and use Twitter or what have you to get my message across. I need to be able to do that with the public sector, and I think that's where my vote will probably go. So it will be interesting as time goes on to see if public sector companies don't leverage some of the more modern communication methods, that there's going to be that challenge.
It's just frustrating. Like I've had a lot of visits from the post office.
Yeah.
So the post office is going broke. Everybody knows it, but they're prohibited by law from innovating.
Yeah.
Because people don't trust that they won't just burn more money.
Right.
And so here they are, going broke. They have a lot of interesting ideas.
Yeah.
Many of which are just like copying what Germany or England does.
Yep.
Right? And work quite well in other parts of the world.
Yep.
But they can't do them.
Yeah,
because of the politics.
It is the bureaucracy there is going to be frustrating.
Yeah, well, so that gets to the question that I had about whether companies are really thinking through how they should be structured, in light of this sort of new environment, these new technologies that are, offer these opportunities.
Yeah.
Is this something that where companies should be doing kind of like a strategy rethink? How do we retool for this era?
It's funny because I just had this flash. There was a period of maybe 10 or 12 years ago when people started virtual workers started to appear. And there was this whole idea of, we need to set up rules for how virtual workers are going to work, and maybe we need to have a separate organization within the enterprise to manage the virtual workers. And now that kind of came and went in a blink of an eye, because they're virtual workers. They're just doing their job, but they're doing it virtually, then they should have all of the benefits, et cetera, for doing that. So I think new technologies traditionally aren't changing the organization's structure. It's just there may be new opportunities to take advantage of those technologies within the organization, but I don't think that in and of themselves they change the way.
What about to manage the sort of risks of, we were talking earlier about the sort of distraction element of this constant flow of communications. When do you have time to focus on your work?
Right.
Do companies need to kind of create space for that or control this somehow?
So I created this team about 3 years ago to focus on collaboration and social media in the wholesale bank, which is kind of large corporate. And over time, in the last couple of years, we've really started to change the organization. So we now have a central social media collaboration team. We have a senior, at the highest senior level, steering committee, when you've got folks from marketing, communications, technology, compliance, legal, that talk about social media and what it means for our customers, what it means for our team members. I think they meet every 2 weeks. And it's become a really important strategy for us to focus on. And it's not about putting limitations on, okay, you can't do this, can't do this, can't do this. It's again, what are we trying to do, and how can we do that in the most effective and compliant way that really gets at our, matches our visions and values, which is really all around serving the customer, right? So what is it we're trying to do? We're not trying to use Twitter. We're trying to use Twitter to connect with our customers, to provide service with them.
That's the point, yeah.
And you've got to have all of these different teams involved. You've got to have operations, you've got to have compliance, you've got to have legal, you've got to have the marketing, you've got to have the people that want to do some stuff. And technology has to be there so that they can implement it quickly. But again, it's not about being restrictive. It's about how can you accomplish the goals you can do. Plus things are changing. I mean, you've got to be careful that so-and-so isn't posting the wrong picture on Twitter or whatever it may be.
But I'm also thinking about it just in terms of productivity. I mean, are we really as productive as we think when we're being constantly bombarded?
Let's just, before we get to that,
Yeah.
so one thing that's people aren't noticing that's happening with this sort of social media and things is that a lot of the basic sort of transactions that, for instance, banking or other things are built on are becoming digital, and go outside the existing regulations. So for instance, some of the digital currencies allow you to do foreign exchange at zero cost. That cuts out what percentage of the banking system? It's like this huge chunk. Or have a lot of people from different banks, very senior people, who've realized that if you can do digital identity, so you know your customer, and you can have this sort of intrusion warning and things, so you can do anti-money laundering, then you don't need half the stuff that banks provide. And the cost can drop by an order of magnitude almost. That was really disruptive and transformative. It's sort of thinking about digital media in a broader context where everything is now talking digital and identities and things like that. And that's going to dwarf the sort of current social network types of things.
Yeah, to me, have been in technology forever. The technology's passing. It's about that customer, right? It's about serving that customer that really you use whatever the latest and greatest technology is that you can use within the proper controls to serve that customer. And if you don't get in front of that, you do end up with as a company that does get phased out, and it was the fact that they didn't realize what the customer really needed and how I used the technology to serve the customer. That was the point they missed. Not that, I didn't recognize Twitter was going to take my company out of business. It's how that technology is being used by the customer, and that's the challenge.
Right, and that gets back to your productivity. So are we being more productive? I think in many ways we are, right? When you use social media for customer service, right? You're much more productive, and the customer is usually much happier, right? Because they're getting served more quickly. From a sales side, you can actually go and you can actually learn about customers and prospects more quickly by using some of these social channels to do that. So I think there's a lot of value there. There's a lot of value of using internal social networks as that kind of local water cooler that you don't have the opportunity to be at. And so you're connecting team members that way. Now, it's not perfect. It's going to take some time to get there, but I think we're starting to see much more productivity gains than any kind of wasting time issues, I believe.
One of the things I see also is that job roles and definitions are changing because you can be much more flexible in how you communicate and what information you communicate. So the idea of being in just sales or just marketing or just blurs, right? In fact, being member of a company is, we know that being with a company for a long number of years is not as likely as it was a generation ago. And so what happens when people become much more transient or they become contractors? That's something that's also supported by this technology. And so you get this much more diffuse corporation that's made up of people that are essentially local entrepreneurs. They're trying to make their way in this cloud of opportunity.
So will we start to be valued for our social connections within organizations to customers, so on, rather than our place in the org chart?
Yeah, I think it's still, it might, what it does, the technology does do, is allow for potentially the elimination of, I'm at this level and you're at this level, right? It allows for those ideas to flourish and grow more quickly, if I could say. But I think there is still, as much as that is a great thing, there is still that whole time management piece, that distraction that we're talking about, when you're you're doing many things at the same time. I'm reading my email and I'm on a conference call and someone's IMing me. We know that it takes you X period of time to switch to the other content and create focus, and that just that drains productivity. So it's almost as if the more pieces are coming at you from these different modes, the worse your productivity is, even though you think by action you're being productive, but you're really not. You're just being massively distracted at a very higher speed.
So it's sort of a hidden cost.
So you have to balance.
Even,
it's that balance of, I can get great ideas now from all over an organization or from a broader network of people. I'm getting fantastic ideas. How do I collect those ideas without being distracted at the same time? And I think those are the costs and the risks associated with it. Now, not doing an advertisement for your book, but some of the stuff you've talked about, some of the stuff you talk about in terms of trying to measure that, I think that's a huge challenge for an organization today and an organization in the near future. If you do consider time to be the most valuable asset in an organization, how you measure how those social interactions are occurring, and then once you can measure it, you can manage it. That's right. That now you're really putting some, rather than it just being, well, it could be this or it could be that. Now you really know this technology is helping and this technology is not, and distractions cost us X%.
It's so amazing to me that corporations, like no corporation in the world measures this sort of stuff.
It's fascinating to me,
no corporation measures the patterns of communication within the corporation, and that's clearly your most valuable resources,
so,
right?
But do the new
really
social tools inside of organizations give an opportunity
Yes, they
for
give an
that,
opportunity.
to kind of understand how work happens in the organization?
Not as much as he believes, but
Yeah.
I think eventually it will.
Yeah.
I think right now it doesn't, because again, they're not integrated in a way that they should.
And face-to-face isn't digitized yet, so that you don't know about that. And
I will tell you, just mentioning Unify for a second, but just as any organization in the communication space, and Unify Communications and social and selling those types of things, it's a hugely important part of the conversation with the leaders of business to say, okay, you're saying, all right, what value is it actually going to give me, versus the distraction, and cracking that code is hugely important to the growth and the advent of social networking in organizations.
But here again, this is where again technology hasn't caught up with us. When you
Right.
start to have, I'll make it up, a flipboard type of experience that says during this time I want to have this information pushed to me that is business related.
Right.
And so you're not going to be distracted of, I'm going on LinkedIn to go check out this person I'm going to go meet. I know, by the way, I saw this interesting article, it takes me down, right? I'm having this stuff come to me and say, during this period of time, this is what I'm interested in.
Right.
And technology can help us eliminate some of those distractions.
Yeah.
So one of the things is also that we still have particular job descriptions, we manage particular things, and if you're in a box that has a lot of throughput, you're going to be distracted, right?
Yeah.
Whereas a better way to do it is say, look, I can manage this amount of stuff and do well. I mean, this is what an entrepreneur would do. Say, look, I can deliver the most value by doing this, and I'll focus on this thing and really execute well. That's making the job boundaries more flexible as a function of the tasks and the communication. And having that more flexible organization can do a lot to reduce this sort of stuff.
Yeah. So in our last about 10 minutes or so, I wanted to get some recommendations for you, for our audience, about how do you create an innovative organization? How do you encourage innovation, sort of in this context, in this new world? Maybe you can each give your words of wisdom.
I'll start.
Okay, Nathan, you're first.
Sure. So I think for us, I think there's two things. Making connections and giving people the tools to help them make connections of people that, for instance, want information with people that need information, or people that want to do some cool stuff with people that can actually help them do some cool stuff. That is one thing. And the other thing is, really, you've got to have a culture that allows for experimentation and failure. And that is, for us, it has been tremendous, right? It gives, if you can make connections, you can be involved in things that have nothing to do with your job, and you have the ability to really experiment and the opportunity to fail and then learn from it and do something different. That's what's going to do the best for you in terms of innovation. That's been my experience.
culture, okay.
Creativity to me is, in an organization, really comes from really two places. And it comes from what does the customer need from you? What are you serving for that customer? And it's not just, I need you to sell me some iPads and sell them to me cheap. But what problems are you trying to solve for the customer? The deeper you understand what the customer's needs are and can really embrace that, you have the opportunity to create more solutions, to create new solutions that will deliver on those needs that may be out of the boundaries of what you thought your normal organization delivered. Having said that, the accelerant for that is greater collaboration, greater inputs from others once you understand what the needs are that you're trying to solve. And I think that social technologies, as well as many of the other technologies out there, as we can embrace those and make those more part of trying to solve the problem for the customer, the more creativity you can
Or
spark.
useful creativity.
Right? The more creativity you have, the opportunity to create, you've laid that foundation. Now, I agree. If you do that in a culture that just doesn't collaborate well, it doesn't matter what technology you put in place, it's not going to happen. But if you can foster that collaboration and focus on the customer and use the right technologies underpinning that, then I think that is the special sauce, I think, for creativity.
I have to agree with both of you, actually. So to use the phrase, the social physics of it, at least as I measure, it has to do with you need to have a group that really talks to each other, that really tests out ideas with each other, to select things that are good to try. You need to have lots of input, exploration from outside, from the customer, from all the other perspectives that touch the outside world in order to get good ideas in there. And then that group needs to be able to experiment and be measured as how well they're doing and given a go-ahead. Sort of like a venture capital. Right. If the group does something small, it looks good, you can give them a little more leeway, a little more resources to try it on a larger scale. If that works well, and that continual sort of churn seems to be the best way to deliver innovation across the entire organization.
And I think what we all said was, what I heard was, it's all about the people. It isn't about the technology, right? The people, it's got to have the people is what drives it.
And the more the technology is not in the way, if you will, right? That it's a natural thing that I naturally use it.
Yeah. Just an enabling tool.
It's about it, it's just part of me. The more that occurs, the more opportunity we have for the people to be more creative.
Right. So, okay, so I heard culture, I heard listen to the customer so that you can kind of innovate in a useful way and sort of iterate, scale up what works.
There's one more piece, right?
Okay.
It may be part of the culture, but when you are going to have a change, you need to get everybody on the same page. Because what you say all too often is somebody has an idea, the boss says, this is a good idea. Everybody else goes, guess what? It's not going to be very successful. Sometimes, but usually not. You need to have some way where everybody comes to grips with what the idea is. They feel a little bit of ownership about it. And that means people have to talk to each other and understand their role in this new thing, and other people need to have heard that. Right. So that's this integration of these new ideas into the group as you begin to change.
And doing that, no matter what size company you are, whether you're a global organization or a small startup or a big government bureaucracy, is the advice different for different size and types of companies? Or is this a universal truth?
I don't think so. I think creativity is you can create some of the greatest things in the world, but if you don't have a market or you don't have a customer who's interested in it, it's kind of.
And it may be more difficult in smaller companies where you have kind of a leader that doesn't want to give up control and then just mandates, right? So sometimes it's easier in a large company when you can get the buy-in, which I agree is you've got to get the buy-in, you got to give up that control, you got to give up some of that ownership so that people really are engaged.
And of course, larger organizations have more problems because you have to get everybody on the same page.
You have to
right?
get a
But
big,
you
That
big
could be a
move.
lot of
use the
people.
technologies to help
That'll
make
help
that
a lot,
happen,
yeah.
right? And to get people on the same page.
'Cause otherwise-
Certainly, technology.
I mean,
can-
we forget
socials
only
will
like
do
10 or
that.
20 years ago, it would have been impossible to do that,
Yeah,
right?
right.
And now it's just merely difficult.
Exactly, exactly.
But you can actually see how it could happen,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so fostering those ideas, the social, these technologies, and using the same technologies socially inside an organization can be extended to the customers, because customers have
Yeah.
plenty of ideas. Some of them
Yeah.
quite valid on how to change what an organization does.
Yeah.
So how you incorporate that to get more nodes, to get more input is really the benefit of the social technologies at this point.
Can you use these tools to create, almost a repository of ideas? I mean, they are recording these conversations, right? So, someone in some corner of the company could have an idea and it gets logged there. It could be referred back to. Do you see that as an opportunity?
I know 100 companies that have tried that, and I
Okay.
don't know of any that I would consider even close to being successful. Now,
And
maybe I don't
and
know
I think
things,
it gets back to that whole, how do you measure what's going on in that social
Yeah.
ecosystem? Because the measurement there's the measurement of the interactions, but there's also the measurement of the value of the content, and I don't think we've really cracked the code yet on that. So, the idea box that you used to have in the lunchroom, now that's just in many organizations just put technology around it. But it's the ability for you to take all of these social interactions to figure out what's actually generating a lot of content and a lot of that's the piece that you want to be able to pull out and use that as your repository.
So let me ask, so there are some things like incremental improvements, like Toyota is famous for. That's quite possible to
Yeah,
do,
sure.
right? You have these suggestions that come up. They're discrete little things. The problem, I think, with a lot of ideas is that you read it and the implications for everybody's role and everybody's behavior is huge. There's all these uncertainties about how the customer will respond to it. And so it needs to have like everybody trying to imagine what this would be like before you could say anything real about it, right? And that's this problem of how do you get innovation, where you get the buy-in and you really decide this is one to do across the whole corporation. Very expensive process.
Very, very expensive. I think, and I think there's an even bigger tidal wave of, we have this whole big data concept, which requires you almost to do even more validation of any single idea. The opportunity exists to do it, but it's not quite as easy as it
doesn't
may.
fit in the normal boxes or the normal lines, yeah.
Okay, well, I want to thank you all for coming. This has been a fascinating conversation. Any final thoughts before we say goodbye?
No,
this is
this
great.
has been great. It's been fun.
Thank you for
It's been really fun.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thanks so
sparking
much
the
for
conversation.
coming.
Yeah.
And thanks again to Unify for hosting the conversation, and to our audience for the excellent questions.